go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we are here with Senior Matters, who are presenting Miss Sylvia and Spellbinders, and I will let her talk a little bit more about that. Before we begin, this is a reminder that this is being recorded. It will be posted on the Garfield Libraries social media accounts, YouTube and Facebook. If you have any questions, please use the chat. I will go ahead and curate that for our presenters. Before we begin, allow me to share my screen to just go over some Zoom items. As I mentioned earlier, we are here with Spellbinders. A little bit about them without getting too deep. They help keep the tradition of oral storytelling alive by interaction with enthusiastic and inquisitive youngsters in the Roaring Fork Valley classrooms, who in turn will keep you young at heart. The Roaring Fork Valley Storytellers conduct storytelling training workshops each year to train volunteers to become certified spellbinders, storytellers who tell students in the Roaring Fork Valley schools. We do have contact information, and I will go ahead and post this at the end of our presentation again. But if you want to contact them, you can contact Jill Sheeley at jillsheeleybooks@gmail.com. And for information about storytelling and Spellbinders affiliated organizations, you can visit the website at www.spellbindersR. This information screen will be posted at the end of our presentation again. This is a Zoom webinar, so we have a couple of options to communicate with each other. Please make sure to use the chat if you have any technical issues or you have any quick comments for our presenters today. I will go ahead and keep an eye on that chat box and relay the information to our presenters. If you have any questions about the presentation or specific questions about the program, make sure you use the Q&A function. This will save your question for us to answer later, either in between stories or at the end of the presentation when it feels appropriate. Finally, this is being translated into Spanish live. So we have our interpretation options. If you look at the bottom right menu screen on your Zoom, you will see a gridded globe icon with the word interpretation right under it. Go ahead and click that and then pick the language of your preference, English or Spanish. If you have any questions about the functions or anything else technical with Zoom, please enter it into the chat and we'll get you going as soon as we can. Now, that's it for me. I will bring on Miss Sylvia, who will take over the presentation for us. Sylvia?
Thank you, Alex. When I tell to the children in the schools, they know me as Miss Sylvia, the Spellbinders storyteller. And today I brought one of my little friends with me, Tiny Tim Turkey. He likes to come with me in November when I tell the students turkey stories. Yeah, I know, those are your favorites. And we have one today. And although this story was originally created, I'm sure, for a very young audience, it may have a lesson for listeners of all ages. The name of the story is Tom the Foolish Turkey. One fine summer day, Tom was walking through the woods just like a wild turkey would normally do, and he meets Bluebird. And Bluebird looks at Tom and she starts to laugh. Well, why are you laughing at me? Tom asks. And Bluebird replied, well, your feathers are black and brown. Oh, everyone knows the best color to be is blue, like me. And Tom paused a minute, and then he went right home and he colored his feathers blue. Well, the next day, Tom is walking down by the farmer's pond. He meets Duck. Duck looks at Tom and he starts to laugh too. Well, why are you laughing at me? Tom asks, and Duck replies, well, your feathers are blue. Everyone knows the best color is orange, like my bill and my feet. Tom goes home. He colors his feathers orange. The next day, he's walking through the woods again, and he meets Frog. The Frog looks up at Tom. He starts to laugh. Why are you laughing at me? Tom asks. And Frog answers, well, your feathers are colored orange. Oh, everyone knows the best color to be is green, like me. And Tom goes right home. He colors his feathers green. Next day, he's walking through the farmer's field, and he meets a mother hen and several little baby chicks. And one of the little chicks stops and looks up at Tom and goes, why are you laughing at me? Tom asked the little chick. And the chick replied, well, your feathers are green. Everyone knows the best color is yellow, like me. And Tom goes right home and colors his feathers yellow. Next day, he's walking through the woods again, and he hears a sound. Tap, 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 tap. He looks up, and it's Woody Woodpecker up there on the top of a tree almost. And the woodpecker looks down at Tom, and then he goes, why are you laughing at me? Tom asks. And the woodpecker replies, why, your feathers, oh, what a color. Everyone knows the best color is red, like me. Tom goes right home and he colors his feathers red. The next day, he's walking through the farmer's field again, and here comes a little black cat with a purple collar. And the cat stops and looks at Tom, and she begins to laugh too. Why are you laughing at me? Tom asks. And the cat says, well, your feathers are red, and everyone knows the best color is purple, like my new collar. Tom goes home. He colors his feathers purple, bright purple. The next day, he's walking through the farmer's field again, and he meets a boy and a girl. And the children look at Tom, and they begin to laugh and giggle. Why are you laughing at me? Tom asks them. And the children say, well, a wild turkey with bright purple feathers? Well, that's the silliest thing we've ever seen. And now Tom has a tear or two running down his face. And he said, I've dyed my feathers red and blue and green and yellow and orange, and I can't please anyone. The children look at each other and they say, we will take you to our mother. Our mother always knows what to do, and she knows best. And they walk Tom across the field up to the farmhouse, and Mother is standing on the porch, and she looks down at Tom. She shakes her head. Oh, you poor creature. She brings him right in the house. She puts him in the bathtub. and she scrubs him up, all those feathers, with soap and water. And when she's through, Tom's feathers are black and brown again. And then she looks at him. She says, Tom, you have been a very foolish young wild turkey. You know that you don't need to try and please everyone. Why, we like you just the way you are. Your brown and black feathers are just right for a young Tom turkey. Well, Tom began to smile, and then he marched out the door and across the field and by the pond and through the woods. And if you see him today, he's wearing his very own brown and black feathers. And that was the story of Tom, the foolish turkey. Did you like that? Yes. Oh, yes, I know. This is the month of November. And if we do see turkeys, yes, I know what might happen to them next Thursday on Thanksgiving. But we'll go on to another story now, all right? All right. Now, this lesson in that other story was designed, as I say, for young children, but adults have been telling stories for thousands of years as a means of communicating to the younger generation their history, facets of their culture, how they're expected to behave, knowledge about the world around them. And our Spellbinders organization for volunteer oral storytellers actually got a start in 1988. Germaine Deesh created a pilot program for the Denver Public Schools. And for this program, the retirees would go into a classroom to tell students stories, maybe folk tales or fables, or even their own life stories. And the program was so well received that by 1990, Germaine and her husband Al created the formal Spellbinders organization to promote connection between seniors and the next generation through oral storytelling. At the moment, there are 14 independent, affiliated, local licensed Spellbinders organizations throughout the country, not just in Colorado, but all over the country. And each local organization periodically will conduct training workshops for new volunteers. Now, since I've become a Spellbinders storyteller volunteer, I have explored stories from cultures all around the world, past and present. And this next story comes from the Micmac and Maliseet Native American Indian tribes who originally lived in what is now the Canadian Maritime Provinces, right around the Gulf of the St. Lawrence River. The name of the story is Glooskap and the Water Monster. Drought was upon the land, and for some time now, there had been no rain at all, and rivers and streams were drying up. The people who lived in the forest beside what was usually a beautiful free-flowing mountain stream with clear sparkling water saw that their stream was now just a bare trickle. So they sent someone up valley to find out what had happened to their water, for they knew that with water we will perish. Without water we must have it. When he returned, it was not good news. There is now a dam across our stream, across the whole valley, he reported. And the men guarding the dam say that their chief is now going to keep all the water for himself. Oh, the people were frantic. Why, we must have water. Go back and beg him, plead with him to return our water. So the messenger left, went back upstream. Again, this time he returned. He was carrying a birch bark cup filled with mud. This, he said, is all the chief will allow us. This is all the water he will allow us to have. Now, the people were just beside themselves. And then they became angry. All right, they said, we will send a party of our fiercest, bravest warriors up there to destroy that dam. So, but when the warriors arrived at the dam, from behind it, out of the water, rose this huge monster. His mouth was big enough to swallow a moose. And his hands were like the roots of cedar trees. And he had this big yellow belly. And he started to grab the warriors in his huge hands and crush them. Fortunately, one warrior managed to escape. And he returned to the people to tell them what had happened. Now, they were desperate. Oh, what were they going to do? Without water, yes, we cannot survive. But one of the elders said, we will pray to the Creator, Gitche Manitou. We will ask him to send help. So they lit the sacred tobacco, and as the smoke rose to the heavens, so did their prayers. And Gitche Manitou heard them, and he saw they were in great trouble. So he summoned Glooskap, and he told Glooskap, go and help the people. Now, when Glooskap went to Earth, he took the form of a very tall warrior. He was head and shoulders above any of the people. And half his face was painted white, and the other half was painted black. And on his shoulder sat an eagle, and beside him, like dogs, walked two wolves, a black one and a white one. And he also carried a large war club. When he appeared, the people thought, oh, Gitche Manitou has heard our prayers. He sent someone to help us. But then they told Glooskap, we're sorry, we cannot even offer you any water to drink. This monster has built a dam across our stream, across the valley, and he is keeping all the water for himself. Well, where is the dam? Glooskap asked. Well, follow the dry stream bed, they told him. So as he began to go upstream, he could see lying there in the sand were dead fish and turtles and other creatures that had lived in the water. Now, when Glooskap arrived, he stood before the dam and he called out, he said, I have come for water. And then the reply came from a voice, the water behind the dam, and the voice said, give him none, give him none. Again, Glooskap said, I have come for water. And that voice came from behind the dam that said, give him none, give him none. 4 times, Glooskap asked for water. And finally, the 4th time, they threw him a birch bark cup, half filled with filthy, dirty water. Now, Glooskap was really angry, and he stomped one foot, and a crack began to appear in the dam. He stomped his feet again, and he began to grow taller and taller and taller, taller than the dam. And his war club began to grow also. It became the size of a pine tree. And he grasped that club and he swung it against the dam, and it cracked right open. And the water began to flow downstream once again. But then he reached out with his mighty hand and he grabbed this monster. And, well, the monster tried to fight back, but he was no match for Glooskap. And as he squeezed the monster's eyes bulged out and his back curved. And then with his other hand, Glooskap began to rub the monster. And as he rubbed it, the monster began to shrink smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, Glooskap said, "Now, you will never keep all the water for yourself again. I have changed you into a bullfrog. But I will take pity on you, and you may still live in the water." And he threw him down into the stream. Now, if you go by the stream today, you may not see the bullfrog. He's still afraid of Glooskap, and he likes to hide out in the shadows near the edge of the stream. However, you may still hear him say, "Give him none, give him none." And the people, oh, they were so happy. The water was flowing again. And some of them even dove right into the stream, down to the bottom, and they stayed there. Well, in fact, they stayed so long, they turned into fish and other water creatures. And from day on, they continued to share the water, for they knew that water can never belong to just one person. And that's Glooskap and the Water Monster, a story from the Micmac and Maliseet Native American Indian tribes. Now, in exploring stories from different cultures, I have discovered that every culture seems to have a creation story. And this creation story that I discovered actually was found by an American storyteller who found this Aztec creation myth written down in a volume called the Florentine Codex. And this volume was compiled by a Spanish priest that had come to Mexico with the conquistadors. And he would write down an Aztec story in the native language on one half of the page. On the other half of the page, he would write a Spanish translation of the story. Well, the name of the story is The Hungry Goddess, La Diosa Hambrienta. But I will tell it in the English version today. Long, long ago, the gods lived on high, and all there was below was water. Everywhere, water. Among the gods, there lived a goddess, and they called her the Hungry Goddess, La Diosa Hambrienta, because all over her body, her hands, her arms, her legs, her feet, she was covered with mouths and eyes. And she was always looking for something to eat. And so she would cry out, oh, she would wail, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry. Oh, tengo hambre. I'm hungry. She would do this all day long. And all night long, she would wail, I'm hungry. Tengo hambre. I'm hungry. And this continued day in, day out. And finally, the other gods thought, wait, we can't think, we can't sleep, something must be done. So they went to the two most powerful gods, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. Now, Quetzalcoatl was sometimes called the plumed serpent. He dressed in white, and he also had warm colored feathers, and he had a staff carved in the shape of a serpent. Around his legs, he had bells, and on his sandals were decorated with pearls. Oh, and he wore sometimes a special mask in the shape of the head of a bird. And when he wore the mask, he could control the winds. Now, Tezcatlipoca was known as the god of darkness. He dressed all in black, and around his legs, he wore the rattles of rattlesnakes. And on one foot, he had a mirror made from obsidian, which is the shiny black volcanic rock. And he would look in the mirror and he could see what was happening anywhere. Well, the gods told him that those two must do something with the goddess that wailed constantly, I'm hungry, tengo hambre, I'm hungry. So the two powerful gods talked it over, and they thought, well, let's check out the water. Maybe there's something there that would calm her. So they flew down to the water, and Quetzalcoatl was wearing his mask to control the winds. So he blew and he stirred up the waves, but there was no food. However, they thought again, and they said, well, perhaps just the water would calm her. So they flew back up, one on each side, carried her down, and she wailed all the way, oh, I'm hungry, tengo hambre, I'm hungry. And then they laid her on the water, and she was quiet. Oh, we've solved the problem. No, not for long. Once again, she began to wail, I'm hungry. And she also began to flail her arms and legs. And so the two powerful gods changed themselves into giant serpents. And one grabbed one arm and leg, and the other grabbed the other arm and leg, and they tried to quiet her, but she was so strong and she was flailing and they were pulling so hard, pop! She broke into two parts. Oh, all right. And the two gods then took the parts back to the other gods, like, all right, now what are you going to do about this? Well, the other gods talked things over, and finally one came up with an idea. We will make this half into the sky, and the other half, why, her hair, we will make into the trees and the forest, and her eyes will become streams, rivers, lakes, and her mouth will be caves, and her shoulders will be mountains, and her skin will be meadows and pastures. Now, Surely she will be happy. We have created Mother Earth. But no, she was still hungry. When the rain falls, Mother Earth swallows it up. When a tree falls in the forest, the earth will consume it. And even a little wildflower dries and dies, earth will consume that too. She is still hungry. And if you listen carefully in the stillness of the night, you may hear on the wind her calling, I'm hungry. Tengo hambre. I'm hungry. That was the Aztec creation myth, the hungry goddess. Now, some very old stories are still told today, like Aesop's fables. But this next story was brought to the New World by the families that came from Spain to settle in Mexico. And then that was maybe about 400 years ago. And then some of them worked their way north. And one family settled in what is now Chimayo, New Mexico. And this particular story has been handed down for generations, for hundreds of years. And whether it actually began in Spain in the Middle Ages or maybe even earlier, I'm not sure. But when the story did originate, back in those days, hundreds of years ago, only the royalty, the nobility, the members of the priesthood would have the opportunity to learn to read and write. But that did not mean that the commoners, the common folk, could still tell a great story. And they especially liked to tell stories that made fun of their betters, the upper classes. So this story is called Pasquel Ranchero. Once there lived a priest whose house was right down the street from the king's palace. And the king would go out on his balcony from time to time, and he would see the priest sitting on his balcony down the street. And the priest might be saying his rosary or studying some scholarly volume. And the king had heard that this priest was very educated, very wise. He thought, well, I am going to find out just how smart this man is. So he summoned the priest to appear before him. And when he arrived, the king said, I have heard you are a very smart fellow. So I have 3 questions for you. I will give you 1 week to come up with the proper answers. But if at the end of that time, you cannot do that, you will forfeit your life. You will be hanged in the public square. Well, the priest thought, I don't have to worry. I've attended the finest universities. I have a library full of books on every subject. So he said, well, Your Majesty, what are the questions? And the king told him. The first question was, how far or how long would it take me to travel to the farthest reaches of the earth? The second question, what am I worth? And the third question, what am I thinking? Well, the priest went home and he began to research the answers to these questions. But as the week passed, why, he had no answers, and he was getting rather concerned. And he had 2 days left, and he still had not found the answers to the questions. And he thought, well, I don't really want to forfeit my life. So I think I'm going to leave town. I'm going to go hide in the mountains. So he told his cook and his housekeeper that, well, I'm going to visit friends for a couple of days. He mounted his horse and he started to ride up into the mountains. He had gone quite a ways, and it was just about sunset when he came upon a shepherd tending a flock of sheep. And the shepherd was kneeling by a small fire and he was cooking his evening meal. As the priest got closer, the shepherd stood up and he looked and said, "Father, what are you doing here?" And the priest looked again and he realized, why, it was Pasquel Ranchero, the young man he had hired to look after his sheep. And Pasquel saw that the father looked very tired. He said, oh, Father, get off your horse and come have some food with me. So the priest did that, but when Pasquel offered him some meat and water, the priest only took a bite. What is the matter, Father? Pasquel asked. And he said, well, it's my stomach. All right, Pasquel said, well, I will make you some herbal tea here, and that will make you feel better. Well, he fixed the tea, and again, the priest drank only a sip and said, well, perhaps I will feel better in the morning. And he stretched out and went to sleep. Well, he tried to sleep anyway, but he was still so worried about would he be able to get far enough to hide from the king's wrath, because he did not know the answers to the questions. Well, he at last snoozed for a little while, and when he awoke in the morning, he could smell the coffee brewing. Pasquel had been up for some time, and well, he was preparing a morning meal. And the priest thought, why, this humble shepherd all alone, he seems so happy. He's singing and he's whistling, and I am this well-educated priest, and I am very sad. Well, finally, Pasquel noticed that the priest was not looking any happier, and so he said, Father, what is the matter? Tell me, I may be able to help you. But the priest said, no, you are a poor shepherd. You wouldn't be able to help me. Well, tell me what the problem is. And even in the telling, well, you may feel better. So the priest told him that he had these questions. The king had given him 1 week to answer. And if he could not answer, he would forfeit his life. Well, what are the questions? Pasquel asked. Oh, the priest said, you wouldn't know. You're just a poor shepherd. Well, try me. The priest told him. And Pasquel laughed. He said, oh, Father, you drown in such little water. You know the answer? The priest asked him. Well, yes. Well, tell me, the priest demanded. Oh, no, Pasquel said. Even the trees here may have ears, but I will go with you back to town, and then we will see what happens. So they mounted. The priest mounted his horse. Pasquel got on his mule, and they rode back to town. And that night, well, Pasquel was sound asleep as soon as he was on the pillow. But again, the priest tossed and turned, and morning arrived, and he had not really slept a wink. Pasquel was still asleep, snoring. The priest shook him awake and said, well, today is the day. Aren't you worried? Oh, no. Don't worry, Father. But there is something I will ask you to do. You must trade clothes with me. The priest thought, well, this is very strange, but I don't know what else to do. So Pasquel dressed in the priest's cassock, and he put on his cape with a hood that shaded his face. And the priest put on the baggy pants and homespun shirt and vest and the big floppy hat that again would have shaded the shepherd during the day tending the sheep. And they began to walk down the street to the palace. Now, they were not the only ones there, for word had spread throughout the town. And the people had heard that, oh, the questions, no one could answer those. Why, surely we will see someone hung in the public square tomorrow. The most excitement they'd had that they could remember. Well, at the palace, the priest, well, Pasquel dressed like the priest, and the shepherd, really the priest, were ushered into the palace and into the throne room. And the king saw the priest and said, Father, step forward, come right here. Oh, shepherd, you wait back there by the door. No, the king asked, well, he thought it was the priest. The priest, do you have the answers to my 3 questions? Well, what were they now? I seem to have forgotten them. Pasquel said, what? You don't remember them? You could forfeit your life. Well, perhaps you had better tell them to me again, Pasquel said. Well, the first question, the king said, how long would it take me to travel to the farthest ends of the earth? Without any pause whatsoever, Pasquel asked, if you traveled with the sun, Your Majesty, you would be there in a day. Well, the king thought, that's a fine answer. And meanwhile, some of the townsfolk were waiting right outside the open window, and they were listening to what was going on inside. And they thought, well, yes, he's answered the first question. But now, the second question, the king said, what am I worth? And again, Pasquel didn't take long to answer. He said, well, you know, our Lord Jesus Christ was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Surely you are worth nothing compared to that. And the folks outside were nodding, yes, he's a good Christian king. He can't disagree with that. So the king said, well, yes, that's a fine answer. Now, my last question, what am I thinking? And as he prepared to answer, Pasquel put his hands up to the hood. And as he spoke, he started to lift the hood away from his face. And he said, Your Majesty, you are thinking I am the priest, but I am Pasquel Ranchero, a humble shepherd. And here, and he beckoned the priest dressed in the shepherd's clothes to come forward. And here is the priest. And the king began to laugh. Well, later back at the priest's house, he was saying to Pasquel, "Why, you saved my life. Let me reward you. I will find you a job here in town. I will give you a place to live. I will give you a horse." But Pasquel shook his head. He said, "Well, thank you, Father. I appreciate the fact you want to reward me, but I don't want to live in the city. I like my life up in the mountain." And with that, he got on his mule, started down the road, whistling and singing a happy tune. And that's the story, a very old story, originally from Spain, Pasquel Ranchero. And it was passed down by a family that had come to our country from Spain for generations, for hundreds of years. Now, there are so many wonderful stories out there waiting to be told. And there are boys and girls that would love to hear them. So I hope some of the people that were listening and watching today would like to become volunteer Spellbinders storytellers, so you too can have a lot of fun and experience the joy of storytelling. Now, our friend Tim says, oh yes, he says, be kind to your turkeys. But in spite of that, we'll wish you next week happy Thanksgiving. And thank you for letting us share our stories and telling you about Spellbinders today.
So, Sylvia, hi. Thank you so much for that. That was great. You're a great storyteller. I have a question for you.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Question?
Yeah. I've been listening as they come out to this year's podcast of, it's called As Seen on Radio, seen like SCENE. And it's about it repairing the environment. And the first part of the series is, how did we get here? How did we get into this mess? And they start with a creation myth. With the Abrahamic creation myth, they pointed out, or they asserted, I should say, that our creation myth is the only one where the gods are outside of nature. Our God created nature, but your God, you know, it's a hungry woman. Is that, do you think that, have you ever heard of creation myth that doesn't come from nature other than our own?
I'm no expert on that, but
you've heard a lot of creation myths. So have you heard one?
No, I haven't heard that particular myth. And I'm certainly no expert. I continue to learn.
But I've never heard one. I thought that was really interesting, that our creation myth it really sets us, you know, because God created nature, not a part of nature, created nature. And he created us in his image. And that kind of began to shape our attitude of that it's all there for us to use, even if we use it up. I thought that was a really interesting observation on creation.
I hadn't heard that one.
You've never heard a different creation myth that doesn't come?
Well, not right off the top of my head. I can't tell you that, but I do know that the different cultures, everyone seems to have their version of a creation myth. But I can't tell you any other specific ones right at the moment.
No, but I mean, have you ever heard one that leaves nature out of it?
No, but I haven't, but I'm sure there are those out there that I'm not familiar with. But the ones that I'm familiar with, I haven't.
Yeah. But I'd never thought of that, but I thought that was a really interesting observation on how we got in this mess.
Did you have other questions?
No questions from me, but thank you, Ron, for your question. At this time, we have about 10 minutes left over. If anybody in the audience would like to ask any questions, please let us know. What I'm going to do now is go back to the screen with the contact information for Spellbinders. So if you are interested in becoming a volunteer, reach Jill Sheeley at jillsheeleybooks@gmail.com. And information about affiliated organizations, that'll be at www.spellbinders.org. And I'll leave this up for a minute so you can write that down. And of course, reaching out to Senior Matters about this, they'll also have the contacts for you. Before we leave for tonight, Nancy, Ron, is there anything else you'd like to say for tonight?
No, thank you very much. I loved listening to the stories. Who doesn't like a good story?
All right. Well, again, this will be recorded, or it is recorded, and it will be available at the Garfield County Library YouTube. Just go to YouTube and look for the Garfield County Libraries. It'll also be posted on our Facebook, and I believe Senior Matters will also post it on their information page. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us tonight. Thank you very much, Sylvia. And thank you, Nancy and Ron and Senior Matters. And thank you so much, Dea, for being our interpreter for today. With anything else, we can go ahead and let you guys go home or enjoy if you're already home.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
good night, everybody. Thank you so much.